Today's World Insight with Tian Wei. The search for a Brexit compromise with the British Prime Minister with the Labour leader, a good sign? And fresh momentum for two old-linked civilizations, China and Italy. What this means under the Belt and Road, in the words of an Italian economic official.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Monday to Friday on CGTN. We begin with the ongoing Brexit process in the UK. British Prime Minister Theresa May is meeting the opposition party leader Jeremy Corbyn on late Wednesday. Mr. Corbyn said he welcomed the Prime Minister's willingness to compromise to resolve the Brexit deadlock, but the planned meeting drew criticism from pro-Brexit MPs of her own party. Take a look.
British Prime Minister Theresa May said after spending 7 hours chairing cabinet meetings on how to plot a way out of the Brexit maze that she would seek another short extension to Brexit beyond April 12th. May also said that she will sit down with the opposition Labour Party in a bid to break the impasse over Britain's departure.
I am taking action to break the logjam. I'm offering to sit down with the leader of the opposition and to try to agree a plan that we would both stick to ensure that we leave the European Union and that we do so with a deal.
Opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn said that he would be happy to sit down with May to work on a Brexit deal. He said Britain needs certainty that the country will not be crashing out of the EU without an agreement.
Well, so far she hasn't shown much signs of compromise, but I'm pleased that today she has indicated she will accept the view of Parliament and is prepared to reach out and have that discussion.
The move by May offers the prospect of keeping the UK much more closely tied to the EU after Brexit. That's as the Labour Party has called for a continued customs union with the EU and a close relationship with the EU single market. But May's move has infuriated many in her party.
Well, I think it's very disappointing that the Brexit process has now been entrusted to Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and I think that the result will almost certainly be, if Corbyn gets his way, that we remain in the customs union so that we can't control our trade policy. The huge areas of lawmaking we can't control.
More than half of Britain's lawmakers voted last week to go for a no-deal Brexit. They say that Britain must cut ties to the EU in order to forge an independent economic policy. May's own divorce deal with the EU has been defeated 3 times by the lower house of the British Parliament. The Parliament failed on Monday to find a majority of its own for any alternatives.
So what's the deal or no deal on Brexit? Let's ask our panelists. In Durham, we have Tom Brooks, who is the Dean and Professor of Law and Government of Durham University. In Brussels, Fraser Cameron, a Senior Advisor at the European Policy Center in Brussels. And with us in our Beijing studio, Professor Wang Yiwei, Jean Monnet Chair, Professor and Director of Center for European Studies at Renmin University in China. Gentlemen, welcome to the 3 of you. Well, help me to update what is the latest. One delay after another. Is this time's delay going to be different, Mr. Cameron?
Yes, it is. I mean, not that I think
you
we
said
can
it every time, Mr. Cameron, when I ask you that question.
No, well, this time it is obviously different in that she's reaching out to the Labour Party, something that she should have done obviously 2 years ago. Having said that, I don't think Mr. Corbyn is going to be any rush to make a deal with Mrs. May, because I don't think he wants the Labour Party tarnished with the Brexit brush. They want the Conservative Party to own this Brexit deal, and then Labour will hopefully win an early election. That's the strategy for Mr. Corbyn. I think there's a better chance, however, of getting a deal through Parliament next week, which is the second alternative that Theresa May put to the nation last night.
Mr. Brooks, though, is it all about political egos of some individuals now and the party politics, rather than anything about the potential relationship between the UK and the rest of Europe? Which one are we talking about now?
Well, I think we're talking very much about the politics rather than anything around trade. Remember, this big disagreement, this problem that Britain is in right now, is not about any trade deal. It is about a withdrawal agreement. It's about agreeing the terms of leaving the European Union, not about the terms of the new wonderful trade deal that many who campaigned for Brexit were hoping to be moving on to shortly, if not already. So we're some ways off that other discussion, which I think is very concerning, that if the country is this divided, at least the largest party in Parliament, the Conservatives, if they are this divided as to what they want, it seems you get three people in a room, you get three different views as to what Brexit means, and the way that they have been publicly attacking leaders of the European Union does not bode well for the kind of trade deals that they want to have in future. So I think this is very much political, and I agree with your previous commentator, too little, probably too late.
Professor Wang, we see some tangles among the administration and the opposition party now in the UK. We also see some tangle between Brussels and London. Well, we cannot really value which tangle is being danced the best. For now, seems pretty chaotic from outside at least. Professor Wang, so tell us which one is likely to lead eventually the nature of the negotiations after all? Professor Wang.
I think the Chinese perspective, we prefers he and he, not divorce and not divide. And
well, that's not so philosophical. That sounds philosophical for politics, I'm afraid.
You know, it's a very disappointed actually this result. Even for the relations between China and the UK, not just between the UK and the European Union. So everybody suffered. This is a lose-lose, tumor of all. You know, the UK's economy also suffered a lot in the past 2.5 years. The economic growth is going down to 2.5%. Recently, they have the PMI is under 50, so it's the lowest. So I think as long as this tensions continue, it's a suffer to everybody. I think we hope that we can make a deal before the April 12th. Otherwise, recently the President Juncker also warned. After that, there's no possible to extension. You cannot just seek extension again and again.
Well, Professor Wang, I'm afraid that is likely to be extended once and again, according to Mr. Cameron earlier in his answer. Mr. Cameron, now, we heard from the European capitals, including from Paris, the very ambitious French president talking about the deal or no deal as well. So are the other capitals. But it seems that they have to eat their words every time when the UK has decided to postpone the process with the EU. So, Mr. Cameron, will the EU, the rest of the EU, I would say, be able to be patient enough to dance that tango as long as the UK is still playing the music?
Yes, there's two main reasons for this. One, they don't want to be blamed for no deal, so I think that's a very important concern, even for the French. Secondly, a no deal would be extremely sort of damaging for the EU as well as the UK. It would obviously damage the UK more, but they don't want to have to go through all the very bad repercussions of a no deal. So I think if they want an extension, and I think this time it will be a lengthy extension, I think Britain will have to take part in the European Parliament elections in May. But at the end of the day, I think everybody would prefer the UK to stay in rather than to actually leave. So there may be conditions attached to the decision next week, but I think in general they will agree an extension.
But Mr. Cameron, if I could just follow up a little bit, you are not just doing UK politics but also the EU in general for decades. Help me to understand this. I mean, this is not just about the EU and the UK. It's also about what EU wants to be in the future, what Europe wants to be in the future. You have later this year a lot of things going on between the trade between the US and the European countries, the EU particularly, on some of the tariff issues. You also have the WTO reform debate going on later in the year. You have a lot of things going on at the same time. The EU is struggling with all of these different agendas, and it needs support of the member countries. Now, the UK is another story about the Brexit, but still EU needs to function. Will EU function well? Well, the Brexit thing is still hanging in the air, always as the biggest question mark. Mr. Cameron.
Well, that's the concern of not just the French, the European Commission, a number of other countries as well. The important thing is to make sure that the EU can continue to function.
Yes.
And if the UK were to stay in just for another year and to take part in the European Parliament elections, which perhaps would give a number of populist, a resurgence of populist voices, both in the UK and elsewhere, this would be very damaging. So there's quite a strong body of opinion say, sorry, you've had your time, we really need to get on with all the other pressing issues facing Europe. You're on your own. Go and see what it's like outside, and maybe come back in a few years' time when you've perhaps got a different breed of politicians who want to take a more rational view of the EU.
What about from the UK's perspective, for an intellectual like you, Professor Brooks, how much do you read there is still patience left in Brussels to deal with whatever right now is going on in London?
Well, I think right now the ball is very much in the EU's court. I agree with what was said about no deal will be bad for both sides. Of course, much, much worse for the UK than it would be the EU. But you know, the UK has been trying to play a game, an old game of divide and conquer. It has made an effort over the last couple of years of as they were negotiating with the EU centrally, they were also going to the separate capitals to try to get different countries to break ranks and to try to undermine a kind of unified front in the EU negotiations, and that is spectacularly failed, incredibly failed amongst 27 countries that have that often disagree on so many other things. We're absolutely united, it would seem, or at least enough united on this, whereas the British government was the one that was really imploding, and without any clear view either at the time of voting to leave, where there was no manifesto for what Brexit was going to be. You had different people who were part of the different campaigns making different claims, some contradictory, arguing that Britain could have better restrictions on immigration, yet have a totally open border with a third country in Northern Ireland. How were they ever going to make that happen? Well, that's been part of the problem they've had. So I think there is a lot of frustration in the EU, and I think that there will be some strict conditions on the UK that will put the UK in a difficult position.
Right. If I could also follow up with you as well, Professor Brooks. Once again, that question. You got a lot of things for the rest of the year. The EU as a whole is being a player out there. You know, for example, to negotiate with the United States, to play a big role with China. So now, here's the UK on the verge of its own choice. Is that giving the UK some strategic advantage or disadvantage? Well, the EU, without the UK, is trying to make the decision. Professor Brooks, the bigger picture and probably the longer picture we're talking about here.
I think it's certainly, yes, I think that you know, clearly Britain leaving the European Union isn't good for the European Union, and I think the longer this saga plays out without any clear resolution, that's not helpful to anybody. But the EU has been, in a sense, prevented from having further integration of its member states, something that a majority seem to want, although I know this is controversial in some parts of the EU. And now they don't have Britain to be the brake on that. So I think that there might be some benefits to EU integration and the EU moving ahead with Britain not being in the mix, although of course regrettably outside the EU. Whereas the UK, I think the UK is in a very difficult position out of all of this.
Yeah.
One thing that we've seen, the way that the UK has handled trade discussions, withdrawal arrangements with the EU, has been really kind of contemptible, the way they've been kind of discussing things in public in a way you would not expect countries to handle such sensitive matters of such great importance.
Right.
And I think a lot of countries, not least the United States and China, may well think twice about the way they want to engage with the UK seeing this behavior.
Well, since China's name is being mentioned, Professor Wang, it's only right that I go to you for your advice. How is China look at this? And how is China looking at the partnership with the EU for the future, whether it's about trade or other fronts, and its partnership with the UK, which is now still part of the EU at the moment. So how is China going to see that long-term gain?
Well, I think China definitely needs UK in EU because EU as the single market for China is very important. For the past 14 years, #1 trade partner. And now negotiating with the BIT, Bilateral Investment Treaty, and the UK take a leading role in this regard because the UK as a DNA is in favor of the free trade and also the investment. The UK actually in the history that attract more investment than the Germany, Italy and France combined together. So but now we need another, actually no one can replace the UK if after Brexit. So we really need UK in EU.
Very interesting you said that, sir. Therefore, I go to you, Mr. Cameron. Does the current situation about the EU with Brexit hanging in the air, forcing the other big players, some willingly to do that, others unwillingly, to have to go bilateral rather than going to the EU as a whole? That's a big question mark, and it's very important for the EU right now when so many things is happening at the same time, Mr. Cameron.
Well, I think Brexit has actually pulled the EU 27 closer together. I mean,
well, together on the Brexit issue, but not necessarily on the other issues, though.
Well, there's no one else, just 2 or 3 years ago, contemplating leaving the EU. That's off the agenda now. I mean, the issues that the EU has to face are firstly in terms of the governance of the Eurozone, in terms of standing up to China, reform of the WTO, developing a new industrial policy, tackling migration. These are big issues. But the EU has always shown an ability to come together and deal with these problems. So I think it's a question now that if the UK is leaving, can the EU move quicker to deliver on these issues? And I think they can. I think after the European Parliament elections, we'll have still a majority of pro-EU parties in the European Parliament, and they will, I think, be ready to push ahead with a new stage of European integration.
Well, you think about it, Professor Wang in Beijing, that the Chinese Premier is going to Europe to meet with the European leaders early April, likely next week. There's likely to be a lot of things on the agenda with the EU leaders, that is. So how is China looking at the uncertainties of the EU, Brexit being part of it, and thinking about building partnerships with the EU? The Chinese president just visited Italy, just visited France, and likely there's future visit by the premier as well to some of the other European countries. So how is China looking at this very big mixture of different elements going on all at the same time, and different momentum going on all at the same time?
I also make a joke that China supports European integration more than the member state of the European Union, like UK. So we need...
Well, that's China's biggest market, and also China
not
is
just so. I think even go beyond
too.
that. Technology transfer in the past years, the European Union transferred more than 1/4 of all the technologies that we attract from abroad. This is very important for China.
Yeah.
And now the WTO negotiation, US pressed China to open more markets, which we maybe can do that. But most important, they were kickoff of the China from the WTO as the developing countries. So and the EU's position is very unique in the G20 in Osaka. So I think about the state-owned enterprises, substitutes, all kinds of the issues that the man, I think, is facing all kinds of the new regimes for the investment and trade.
Right.
So EU always be the multilateral supporter, and I think it's also DNA for peaceful negotiation, which China is here.
The European Union is a very important player, absolutely. For example, about the Iran issue, Mr. Cameron, I go to you on that too, since you're looking at many of the international issues as well. The EU standing up toward Washington and suggesting, there is a way that we honor agreements. For example, that one with Iran. So, but the question really is being dragged rather by issues like Brexit. How much in a strong spirit will the EU be, particularly when the negotiators from the other side of the table trying to corner you for issues like this? Mr. Cameron, from the EU's perspective.
Well, I think the EU has shown itself to be a major player in the debate over reform of the WTO. It's engaging with China, the US and Japan and others. It's put some substantial reform proposals on the table that are accepted by all member states. So the ball is actually now in China's court. I think when Premier Li Keqiang shows up in Brussels next week, he'll find a confident EU, an EU that wants to engage with China in a number of issues, economic and trade obviously, but also increasingly on political and security issues. We're working together on issues from climate change to Iran to Afghanistan. So I think the agenda there for EU-China relations going forward is one that shows a very confident EU and equally a confident China. So I think relations are set for good shape.
Well, we want to drag it back to the current ongoing negotiation now. Inside the UK, Professor Brooks, I have to go to you about that. There is a possibility between Brussels and the current administration inside the UK talking about opening up some legal part of the 480-something pages document about the Brexit between the EU and the UK. Now, how much possibility really is there for change?
I think right now there is very, very, very little possibility of change right now. I think that Theresa May probably made a massive mistake, maybe one of the biggest in her career, in thinking that the deal that she thought she had agreed with the EU was one that she could sell back in the UK if only she kept delaying things closer and closer to the deadline to force the hand of her opponents. Clearly, I think that there isn't much room here for much maneuver. Remember, one of the biggest stumbling blocks for the Prime Minister in getting her deal through Parliament isn't anything proposed from the EU. It's her own idea about this Irish backstop proposal, about leaving open the Northern Irish border despite trying to have a different regulatory regime within the UK, separate, entirely separate, it might seem, from the EU. That's the one that's been causing her all the problems is her own making. So I think there's not going to be any possibility of opening that up. I think the EU will if they're smart, will probably try to push the UK into a second referendum on the deal or cancelling Brexit, at least for now, because I think the other options are even worse than that unattractive one. Will there be any redrawing of this legal arrangement? Well, maybe in future, but not anytime soon. I think the EU will want to draw a line under this and move on, and I think so too will the UK.
Well, very complicated picture, changing by the day. We'll see when the deal and no deal will eventually come to a definite answer. For now, I want to thank the three of you for your expertise helping us to clear up the latest situation. Tom Brooks, Fraser Cameron, Wang Yiwei. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. Fresh momentum for two old linked civilizations, China and Italy. What does this mean under the Belt and Road, in the words of an Italian economic official, right after this break?